Good afternoon, everybody. It's strange. It's a Friday afternoon. In on the East Coast. Don't know where you guys are watching from, or if you're watching this on YouTube later on. But welcome to Goodman Games, our free RPG Day special. This is our second special that we're doing, that we're streaming. We already did one earlier in the week for the DCC module release. This time we are going to be talking about the 5e module that we are releasing on Free RPG Day. And I have a very special guest that I'm going to introduce in a moment. Actually, let's introduce her now. And so she's not sitting around awkwardly waiting and everything. So I really everybody to meet Jennell Jaquays, the author of the original Dark Tower module. And if you're probably wondering why she's joining me on this stream today, you're going to find out really quickly. And you can probably see it over my shoulder as well. So welcome.
Hey, Chris.
I hope you're doing well.
Let's say I'm doing okay.
Okay.
Okay, I've risen to the level of okay today.
All right, we'll take that. We'll take that. It's a Friday afternoon. The weekend's coming. It's Free RPG Day weekend, so things can only get better.
All right.
So yes, so everybody, Free RPG Day is tomorrow, Saturday, October 16th. We're gonna throw a link in the chat so that if you guys are not aware of where there's stores in your area that are doing Free RPG Day, you can actually click that link. That will bring you to the Free RPG Day website, and there's a little finder there. You put your zip code in, or you put your town in and your state in, and then it'll pop up a map that will show you where all your participating stores are. Please, everybody, support your friendly local game stores this weekend. That's why we do this promotion. That's why Goodman Games supports this promotion. Friendly local game stores have obviously, just like almost everybody in the world, the last 2 years have had a very rough time. This is a time to celebrate, to get back, to go down to your store, pick up some awesome free swag, not just by Goodman Games, other companies supporting as well. But more importantly, buy something while you're in the store. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this. I mean, it's great to get free stuff, but please, you don't have enough dice sets. I know you don't have enough dice sets because nobody does. So pick up a set of dice or something for a couple bucks or whatever. But, and if possible, play in a game at a friendly local game store, run a game. Be safe. There's still some areas out there that we are still in this pandemic, so don't do anything that you don't feel comfortable with. If you need to, go to your store, pick up your free books, purchase something, go home, run a game, stream that game on Twitch or something, or tell us about it. Anything, but just let's try to celebrate role-playing games, at least for tomorrow, because that is the whole goal here. So with that out of the way, let's just get right down to it. I got all sorts of cool questions for Jennell here. I've been looking forward to this all week. This is like the cherry on the top of my week here. I was like 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon. I get to ask Jennell all sorts of cool questions, and this is going to be fun. Hopefully you guys are going to come along for the ride. If you guys have any questions, throw them in the chat. We will try to get to them. Questions for either myself or Jennell. You guys have lots of opportunities to ask me questions, so by all means, send them her way if you prefer. But we'll try and get through those too. We're gonna go through a couple things here, and we're just gonna have a back and forth conversation. So, so first of all, it is my pleasure and my honor to be with you here today, Jennell. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your schedule. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for letting me be here. I'm going to try and not treat this like a congressional hearing. So I'm going to keep my I don't recall responses to a minimum.
Excellent, awesome. That sounds great. So our 5e release for Free RPG Day this year is called the Sunken Tower of Set, and it is a tie-in with Dark Tower, which if you folks are not aware, earlier this year in March at one of our previous virtual conventions, we announced that we have the license to actually not only reprint Dark Tower, because we've done that before, but to actually convert it to 5th edition. And this is obviously exciting. You guys know I've done several of the other ore books, and this is so much fun to take an old classic module and convert it. I love it. I've gotten so used to it now. I have a system down, and I really actually enjoy it a lot. And one of the things that I really enjoy is actually getting to expand on some of that material and add extra things. And the Sunken Tower of Set is that exactly. Originally, This was actually going to be in the book that I was working on, but then we decided we wanted to have this tie-in for Free RPG Day. So I said this would be perfect. This is a nice self-contained setting that I can just pull out. You don't need the Dark Tower product to play this. This is a standalone module. You can just throw this right into your campaign. But if you do get Dark Tower, you're going to really like it because there's some really nice, juicy tie-ins. So let me just jump right into the questions that I have for Jennell here. So bring us back to 1979, I think it was.
78 was when I started.
78.
1978 was when I started working on it, right after I joined Judges Guild.
Okay, 1978. What was your inspiration for designing the Dark Tower?
Okay, got to go back. Conan the Barbarian. In high school, I read every Conan the Barbarian book I could get my hands on, which were the original Lancer books, which had the kind of expanded stories from Lynn Carter and L. Sprague de Camp, and then the whole Marvel comic books. So by the time I was out of school, I was fairly well steeped in the lore of Conan the Barbarian, of that whole world. And Dark Tower was my first commercial game adventure. So I'm driving back from my interview with Judges Guild down in Illinois, driving back to Michigan, and I'm just starting to run through things I like, what would make a good big adventure. And I keep coming back to the story, Red Nails, the story of two factions in a ruined city temple complex who are actually related to each other in some way, but they have been at war forever. And they're just constantly counting coup on each other, taking captives, murdering each other. And two strangers come into the middle of this and are caught up in this tragic story of these people. So that was the basis for the whole setting. In fact, if anyone, that whole setting kind of carried forward years later to the whole concept of the Capture the Flag video game. It's really sort of the same thing. You got two people fighting back and forth across a ruined or temple or space dungeon.
Oh, cool. All right.
So that was the first one. The second one, we come back again to the Conan mythos, which is the conflict between two deities. I think this is one of your later questions. So, but there's this conflict going on, and I decided that, well, what if we put their two temples right across from each other, and then buried them? That was the concept, because I was also an art student in college, and we studied architecture, and I'd been over to Europe to visit both ruins and cathedrals and things like that, and those kind of stuck with me. So the idea of taking two pieces of unique architecture, I tend to think of the White Tower as being like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the Dark Tower is like, I guess the way it's a stocky version of the Washington Monument. It's an obelisk with a pyramid at the top, and those are my two opposing forces. And then I, for some catastrophic reason, bury them completely.
Well, probably because back in the day, it was all about dungeons and underground exploration. And
well, of course it was.
Yeah.
Where do you think that whole game name came from?
Exactly. So you're like, let's bury these suckers, and it'll be, then people will be right at home and they'll know exactly what it is. Wow, that's fascinating. When you set out for writing this, did you think it was going to be as massive as it ended up being? I mean, it's like 80 pages, which for the day is huge.
Well, back in the day, yeah. My current project's over 800, but let's say no. I just wrote. I just literally, I drew maps. I knew what my maps were going to look like, and then I populated the maps. And I'm not working on a word processor, so pretty much when I committed words to paper on my typewriter, other than cut and paste with scissors and glue, I was creating the manuscript as I went. And so I really wasn't thinking about total length, just, I got to finish this. it's got a bit done. They're getting on my case.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. In the chat, Kyle Kreider has already commented, I have all the originals, can't wait for the 5e versions. Love y'all. Jennell, you rocked my childhood. Just wanted to share that with you. So
Ruining
already,
people's lives for 40
yes.
years.
All right. So you talked about maps a little bit. So this is a perfect segue. So others have coined the term Jaquaying the dungeon. For the viewers, if you could please explain what that term means, and then how did you go about creating, you've touched on it a little bit, but how did you go about designing this mega dungeon? Because it is kind of the first mega dungeon that was ever created, with all those levels and rooms and the towers and whatnot.
Well, I have to be clear from the start. I had no idea what I was doing. Okay, there was no plan. It's what the Jaquaysing the dungeon thing is. That was basically someone analyzing, a number of years of my work and deciding that there were principles involved. So whatever I was working on was internal. The process, the whole idea behind it is there's a couple of things. One of them is non-linearity. The idea that you have a story setting, and that's the way to think of dungeons or any adventure. Is there a story setting? You may set it up for events to occur, and they may play better in a particular sequence, but you really need to think about, well, what if they come in from stage left instead of stage right? And what if they've already had these other experiences elsewhere in the setting? So that's kind of that part, is that non-linearity. The other thing is non-horizontality. Back then, and still now, I tend to think in 3 dimensions when I'm designing spaces. First stuff I did for myself was all the standard issue, flat layers. Everything was on the same plane on the graph paper. But as I actually got into designing, I started thinking more like, well, what's the history of this place? That's the other thing I do. I don't think I got really covered, but what's the history of this place? Who's lived here before? What have they done with it? What have they done with since? How has the population changed inside of it over time? And I try to accommodate that in my designs. And it often means you've got an existing building, and then people changed it. People remodeled it. People added new spaces. People built in ways to reach other parts that were new or older. So it's this whole idea of a dynamic living space over time. And that's pretty much permeates everything I do now.
That is fascinating. And trust me, in the last couple of months, I have dove really deep into doing this conversion. And it's taken me a lot longer, mostly because I have to stop and pull the maps out. And when I say maps, I mean maps, plural, and figure out, wait a minute, where does this go? This goes here. Now this moves over to here. And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, you should see my desk. I had all the maps spread out and everything. I'm okay, so now I'm on level 1 here. Now this one goes to level 3, but then from level 3, it can then go back in teleporters. And it was like, it was a challenge, but it's fascinating because it really gives you a dynamic setting and an environment. We talk on our other show all the time about how, an encounter with 10 orcs in a plain 20-foot room is boring, but now, throw them on a rope bridge, with a chasm and roaring rapids underneath, and all of a sudden now you got something, you've got something memorable. And that's exactly what this dungeon's all about. Now, I would like to just follow up on that. When doing the free RPG Day module, we have some real limitations now. I don't have 80 pages to work with and do all these crazy connections and everything. And unfortunately, the dungeon in that one, which is a temple, a sunken temple, is kind of simple and actually very linear. And actually, if Elena, if you want to pull up that map, we can kind of show that off. So this is going to be a little bit different. So yeah, I mean, I've got some different ways to actually get to the dungeon. So I kind of use my inspiration on that. But it's very difficult, and only I think I had 15 pages or something like that to kind of get that dynamic feel of all these different entrances and exits. But that said, even you inspired me. I didn't even know it was you that inspired me. I found out later, but I did a similar thing for a mega dungeon that I did called Castle White Rock, where I had all these different entrances on different levels, and you can be on level 2 and then end up on level 8 before you know it. And I didn't know I was emulating your stuff. I mean, I was very familiar with all of your material, but looking back now, I'm like, wow, I was doing that too. And I'm like, and I didn't even realize, where I'd kind of picked that habit up from, but it was clear that I picked that habit up from your module. I mean, Dragon Mountain and Dark Tower specifically. So,
well, Dragon Mountain's not actually mine.
oh,
I just did the cover for it.
really? I thought that was yours.
No, I think that was Colin McComb.
Oh, okay. So I got that.
And others.
Okay.
And others.
So okay, I've been learned today. We're all learning today, which is awesome. So okay, so let's talk about those deities. So the deities, Mitra, is that how you say it? Mitra?
Well, since it comes from Mithra or Mithras, okay. I've always pronounced it Mitra, but Mitra. That's okay. Just me. Probably if you're speaking European, it's Mitra. But,
okay. Mitra and Set are prominent deities that are at war in the original Dark Tower. So why did you select these particular deities to clash against each other?
Well, let's go back to Conan the Barbarian. Because that's where it started. Conan, in at least a couple of adventures, he encounters minions or priests who serve the Thocian. Thocian? Well, it's the god Set. And he's got a pseudo-Egyptian culture in there. And that's where Set comes from. And then he's got a character, Mitra, who is based on kind of a Roman mystery god called Mithras, or Mithra. And so in the Conan setting, that god was continued like one of the good gods. They were, or the nice guy gods, if gods could be good. So they seemed to be natural enemies in the stories. So I made them enemies in my dungeon, which meant I had to go, there was stuff in the deities and demigods. Deities, demigods, and heroes was the OD&D expansion where the original material appeared. Now that didn't survive actually into any future AD&D material. So the original source, everything I pulled from, is from original D&D. Okay. There was stuff in there. There was content in there for Set. I don't think there was as much for Mitra, but so I needed to pull up some ideas and make my own setting or my own artifacts and culture that would express the quote, the good God. And so that's how I ended up with, I think, the Lions of Mitra and all, trying to fill a tower with good aligned deities or good aligned creatures and characters.
Great, excellent. That is fascinating because I remember when I first started doing the conversion, I actually had a little bit of trouble finding information on Mitra. I was like, I'm like, what am I missing? And I'm like, and I remember it from the Conan stories. I mean, very much so. And I think it's also important to note, I think everybody is very, well, not everybody, but there's a lot of the younger gamers. They think the Conan movies, back, which I think was 82 and 85, I think.
The first one was 82, I believe.
Yeah, and I think it was 85 or 86 or 84, somewhere in there. By the way, very popular movies. And I think a lot of the younger crowd probably can relate to those. That you're creating this all years before those movies came out. And I think that's fascinating too, because I almost feel like when I'm going through some of this material, I'm like, I get transposed to the movie at times, with the snakes and everything. And I'm like, oh, wow. And I'm like, and then I got to think, nope, this was not inspired by the movie. This was actually all before.
No, you have to go back to the original 12 Lancer books.
Yep.
And the Marvel comics.
Yeah. Which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So, okay, so one of the really fascinating things about Dark Tower, this is great. Your warning to me, I believe, back in March was something along the lines of, watch out, there's a lot of NPCs in there. Have fun with that. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. Oh my gosh. So are you ready? I counted them. I counted them because I had to convert almost all of them to 5th edition. So there are 89 named NPCs in that module. Now, I think I named 2 of them. There was like an imp that didn't have a name, and I think I gave it a name. And there was maybe one other. So there was like 87 named NPCs in that 80-page module. So I have to ask you, why that many NPCs? Why that many, characters? Because I think back to some of the early classic modules, B1, B2. Well, B1's not great enough. B2, the Gs. You got maybe 3 or 4 named NPCs in some of those modules. You didn't get 80, or you didn't get anywhere near that. So what was the thinking behind that? Your process?
Okay. The way I generally looked at it was, if you have a monster with hit points that you find in a monster manual, or in I can't remember what the OD&D book was, the green book. It was, but the one that had the monsters in it, you had all the stats there in a one-line description, and your general response to when you met one of those was run or kill it.
Yep.
Didn't really matter what alignment it was. You really didn't interact. But if you made an NPC, suddenly things got more complicated, because they became, possibly in the mind of the game master, a person who would have a rational response to these intruders in their space. Now, they might respond by just immediately killing everyone, but they're not necessarily going to just constantly, I'm going to fight until I'm out of hit points and then I am dead type response. So they became more complicated interactions than players. Now, in my defense, back then, an NPC literally could be a paragraph of description, 6 stats, whatever weapon they were using, and maybe their favorite spell, and that was it.
Yep.
I have done some 5e conversions on some of my work recently, and I feel your pain about dealing with NPCs. And my book had 3.
Yeah, it took me significantly longer, but fun. I mean, really fun. Try to actually, and I actually tried to breathe even a little bit more life into them, because I did take them a little bit step forward for, like you said, a couple of lines, a couple of stats, favorite weapon, maybe a favorite spell. It was nice actually, going a little bit further on them as well. So that was
5e almost forces you into depth, which makes more work. And then I'm going to really feel your pain again when you come to say, okay, now we have to play test and balance this.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, we're not going to have to do that, because our conversions are strict conversions from the original. And then we just put all sorts of warnings in there. So yeah, and it doesn't always, trust me, that final encounter and your dragon definitely don't follow any kind of balanced encounter rules. So, but what we do is we add sidebars and things, and saying, okay, if you want to make this balanced, here's some things that you can do. Because, and it's just our design philosophy. When we started doing these conversions years ago, we sat down at a table, I believe it was at GaryCon, and we had the conversation of, are we going to make them balanced 5e encounters, or are we going to do a true conversion to really make it an homage to what came before? And our choice was, it was really Joe's decision, was no, we want it to be exactly the way it was. So if there was 17 orcs there and you were first level, you got 17 orcs in your face. So
okay. Well, let's say I respect you for that. I know that when the one I just did, I've got a 5e conversion of something I did for the Dungeoneer that I've been working on. And I had to run it through several playtest sessions to get a feel, blind tests, not playtest, but blind test sessions. Yep. And mine is it is a, what do I want to say, a conversion? It is, I made it play as 5e, not as the original way, because otherwise, there's way too many orcs in there.
Yeah. Well, that does happen at times, or the other way around too. There's not enough orcs in there, or there's giant rats in one encounter, and then there's a lich in the next room, and you run into those situations as well. Yeah, I know it's not perfect, and there's definitely two different schools that you can go with on either of those, and we just decided back 5 years ago when we started doing this was the way we were going to do it. And then we would just put those notes in there to help the game master along, because most game masters are going to change things based on their party anyway,
right?
And everything. But you are so right. I mean, balancing and playtesting are crucial to anything that you're doing if you want it to be enjoyable and you don't want to have that TPK thrill. Now, back in the day, and this is fascinating. Like you talk about the NPCs and everything. Back when you were designing this in 78 and 79. You didn't have hundreds of and 40 years of modules to base things off of. You were a trailblazer. You were the one creating it. So putting in an NPC, not realizing it was cutting edge or new, really was back then. It was taking it a step further down the road, which is just fascinating to kind of put myself. I wouldn't even know what that's like.
Well, say at the time I had 5 module short adventures to draw from, and I had written half of them.
Yeah.
So because they were from my fanzine, the Dungeoneer, where we actually started writing this kind of stuff. And even then I was including a few NPCs and making characters.
Yeah.
But basically, if a setting needed someone to interact with or someone to give it more color, I made an NPC.
Yeah. I get it. Again, seems so obvious today, but back then, not as obvious, and it's fascinating. So tying into that a little bit, so you have all those NPCs, but you also threw in new monsters to challenge the PCs. Which again, when I buy a module, the first thing I always go to is the back of the module to look at what new monsters, because that was like the best part. Even if there was only 2 or 3 in there, it just felt like, all right, 2 or 3 new monsters. This is great. So you did the same for Dark Tower. Your dizzying array of statues and different types of statues is amazing, which is great because probably at some part halfway through this, the PCs are like, oh, here's another one of those statues. We know what to do, and then all of a sudden, this one's shooting lightning bolts out of its eyes and really turning them on the ear and everything. So I think I know the answer to this, but I will ask it. So what was your inspiration for numerous new monster designs, given the fact that wasn't the AD&D Monster Manual was out pretty recently? Around
it came out while I was in college, I think.
Yes.
Because that would have been 77, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was 77 or 78. I think my printing is 78, I think.
I could probably go off camera here and find my original copy that I got, which is kind of dog-eared and falling apart. But the thing is I've always felt that I make, if a situation needs something new, I don't hesitate to make something new. One of the things about monster manuals, even back in the old days when there was just the one green pamphlet and Greyhawk, and then the AD&D Monster Manual, which was, just to be clear, that was all we had of AD&D in 1978 when I started working on these. So people already knew what those things were. People had memorized them. People had already gone through deities, demigods, and heroes and said, my characters killed everyone in that book. So I never, if a situation needed it, I made a new creature. And I'd already been doing that in the Dungeoneer, coming up with new creatures to fit things. So this time around, I saw the only one that really sticks in my mind are the Sons of Set.
Yes.
So those are the ones that stick in my mind, and my thoughts behind those were creating essentially a demigod character or a boss level or sub boss level opponent who every time you met it, you met one, they weren't the same creature. They were
Yeah.
part of a large family of deity of basically set-based demons, set-based devils, and every one of them was different, had different powers, and then there was a hierarchy. So you had just the regular ones, and then you had the favored ones. I don't remember the exact term anymore, but you had a set of basically the guys who were Set's lieutenants,
Yep.
and they were even better and asser.
Yes. So yeah, let's talk about them. So you created an entire system of tables and charts to actually determine their appearance and then all of their abilities. And it was very it was fascinating. And it was one of the first things that I latched in onto when I started doing the conversion. It was basically the first thing I had to do was I had to convert that whole system over of all those tables to 5e because I'm like, I can't do the conversion of the existing sets, Sons of Set, until I have that system all down, so I know what all those abilities are. So that was fascinating. What was your inspiration on all those tables and charts to get to create that? I think I might know what the answer is, but I want to hear from you.
It was the way of the universe back in the 70s. I mean, I worked for Judges Guild, and Judges Guild was known for dice tables.
Yeah.
And I'd already partially done my own character history system, an early version of something that would later get published. But yeah, it's just you go through and it's random generation. Random generation is a pathway to creativity and inspiration.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, Gygax loved tables and charts and subtables, like tables that then send you to other tables, which you do as well. And it's just fascinating. And it's like the more complicated and kind of, you know, twisted you can get, the more interesting it is. And it's great. And it comes up with the perfect villain or boss battle, like you said, because you might run into one of these Sons of Set on one level, and then the next level it's a completely different creature. It looks different, it's got completely different abilities. In our free RPG Day module, I took that concept and I created a completely original Son of Set, and he's the boss battle essentially of the free RPG Day module. And if Elena, if you can pull up picture number 4, we're actually skipping over, going to picture number 4. We can show you like what that is. And this guy's got a snake body. He's got a human torso. He's got 2 arms because he can have more than 2 arms because there was a table for that. And he's got 3 crocodilian type heads, but he's got horns on them, and his bite can petrify opponents, and he can regenerate, and he's immune to magic. So it's fascinating, but completely different. And then you go run into the next one, and it's a completely different creature. Love that system, and that system just it lends itself. It just gives all the tools to the game master to like, here, go have some fun, go create your own Sons of Set, and challenge your characters with it. So fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Okay, so let's see, where I want to go. Okay, so back to the NPCs. You've created in Dark Tower some very unusual NPCs, and I'm not sure you're going to remember many of them because this is what, 40 some years ago.
Yeah.
But can you remember any of your favorites? And if you don't, I have a couple that were just stand out for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and flip back to remember one. There was a wizard who had magic jarred themselves.
Yes.
Half-Sprung Hell Eyes.
Yes, that's his name.
They were one of my favorite characters back then. Yep. And then there's the old priest up in the city, Cornelius.
Yep.
So yeah, I actually had when I had a chance to work on the miniatures concepts for a company for these. I based one on Cornelius, and I based another 3 on Half-Sprung Hell Eyes, because that was 3 of their bodies they used.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So Hafrung, for those who are not familiar with the module, destroyed his physical body in I think you called it a magical experiment gone awry or something like that. And he magic jarred himself, and he just uses other bodies. He basically jumps from other bodies, and that it's one day he's like, I'm gonna be in this body, and the other day he's like, I'm gonna be in this body. So you could actually encounter him 3 times, and each time he's in a different body, and you don't know you're actually facing the same NPC, which is just fascinating. And again, I find it fascinating now. I can't even imagine what that was like in the early 80s when that was just taking an NPC and turning it on its head. I mean, that was just absolutely crazy to even think about that.
well, there was that spell. There was this spell called
Yep.
Magic Jar, and it was fairly high level, so it meant the person using it had to be fairly powerful. But it made an interesting story situation, particularly when you gave the person using it some, the reasons why they were using it and what they were doing with it, as opposed to just, oh, you kill me, but my spirit goes back into a magical container. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, which, and it just fabulous. And it's funny because I remember when I first got in the game, and I have not been playing as long as you. I got in '81, so I was years past that. But I remember coming across Magic Jar, the spell, and I had no Magic Jar. I was like, what is this that you put jellies and preserves in or something? What is this?
Yum.
And I'm like, but nope, it was like Magic Jar, and then you read it, you're like, oh, I'm like, it's like transferring souls and stuff like that. It was like really kind of off the wall, and it was fascinating. And I love that the fact that you did your treatment of Hafrung that way was just like, definitely one of, I remember, all of our classic modules, we go over this on our other show where we talk about these classic modules. There's always 1 or 2 things when you say a module that just comes to your head, like right off the bat, like an encounter or an NPC or something. And Hafrung is the one for me. I'm like, I just think, that's the wizard with the no real body. It's like, it's fascinating. And then he's got this little room where he takes care of his bodies he jumps into, where he's like, they're all, there's pillows and wine, and they're all like, they're all treated like royalty basically to keep his vessels basically all like, happy and everything. So fascinating. Let's see. All right, so we already talked about that. We're actually kind of coming close to the end here. So so this is Free RPG Day weekend. Can you tell us about your favorite friendly local game store that you frequented back in the day? Did you have one?
Back in the
Whenever,
day,
even if
yeah. I lived in a very small town in southern Michigan, and neither this little village that I lived in, which was associated with a college, nor the larger town next door to it had anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons in the mid 70s. So we used to drive. My friends and I used to drive up to East Lansing, Michigan, and we would hit a hobby store just across from the Michigan State campus called Ryder's Hobbies.
Okay.
They were at the corner of Trowbridge and Harrison, I think. But they were a chain of hobby stores, and they sold Dungeons and Dragons. They sold tabletop gaming miniatures. If back in the day, since there was very few different products coming through, they were able to have everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I being a completist back then, I was tended to buy everything when I had money to do so.
Yeah.
So that was one. There was another one up in the nearby mall, and eventually there was a comic book store we would hit. So there was just several stores, and it would be years and years and years before where I had been living any store would even carry it. Even it was after the whole steam tunnels debacle that when D&D became popular, that other stores started to take notice that, oh, there's this product that kids and college students seem to be interested in.
Yeah. Do you remember how you got your first copy of the rules. I've heard things that back then most people didn't pay for the copy of the rules. They got like a bootleg photocopy from a friend of a friend of a friend, and it was copied. And I remember those old photocopy machines when you copied them, a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Pretty soon you couldn't read it anymore. So where did you get your original set of the rules from?
My original set of the rules was totally legit.
Oh, right.
The quick story is I was working at a college radio station then, in I think it was October of '75, and I was on the air, and which meant we were playing long records and playing tapes. And my younger brother, who is the actual gamer in the family, called me up at work and said, "Hey, I got this copy of a magazine called The Space Gamer." It was produced by Metagaming Concepts, an Austin-based game company, and this was their house fanzine basically. And he said, "Here, there's a couple of reviews of this game that sounds really interesting to me." And there was 2 half-page reviews of, and then we're talking a digest-sized magazine, half-page reviews of this game called Dungeons and Dragons. And this was like, there are points in your life when the world changes, when your life changes. That was one of them. And we found out how to get a hold of it. They had this catalog. I ordered a copy of Dungeons and Dragons and Greyhawk. My brother ordered a copy of Tunnels and Trolls, which was still being produced basically on a mimeograph back then.
Wow.
And about a month later, I got a copy of Greyhawk. My D&D books were back ordered. Okay. So I wrote in the big history book that's going to be coming out from Goodman. I wrote my second story is everything I know about D&D I learned from Greyhawk. That's my essay in there, one of my essays in there. But that's where we learned about D&D. So we had this partial view of what D&D was like. So we were fantasizing in our head what we were going to be doing with it. I didn't actually get to play the game till like February of the next year, because Christmas came, gone from school. I went on a college trip for a month. And when I finally got back, my friends had somehow managed to get a hold of the rule set and we're playing already. My rule set.
Oh, wow. That is a great story. So that's fascinating. I mean, so for me, like you said, it's interesting how you say, I have a completely different reason why I remember the day when I got my first set. Now, again, I got mine in February of '81. So my first set was the Moldvay box set with the Errol Otis cover. So I didn't get into, funny story, I married into the OD&D box set. My wife actually played with that set with her family. When I married her, that came into my collection. So that's how I married well.
You married well.
You
married well.
Trust me, in many, many ways. I can't even begin to tell you. It's the reason why I got to leave my job and join Goodman Games full time, because she makes a lot more money than I do. So
I hear you on that.
So I came home one day in February, and I got home from school, and I come around the corner into the dining room, and there's my box set sitting on the table that I'd ordered from Sears Roebuck, because my mom worked there and she brought it home with her. And my mom was in the kitchen, which was nearby, and she goes, "Oh, hey," she's like, "I've got great news for you." And I'm like, "I can see it. It's on the dining room table." And that wasn't the great news. The great news was I had just become an uncle, and my sister had just given birth to my niece. And my mom was like, "So you're an uncle, your niece was born today." And at that point, I'd already ripped the shrink wrap off, and I was already pulling at the dice, those terrible dice that wear down after a while. But that's why I remember the day that I got my first official box set. I played it a couple months before in school when it went around. But I'll always remember that day because it's the day that my niece was born. So it's like, I'll never forget that day. Now, I had no idea that 40 years later, I was going to be working in the industry and getting a chance to, some of these books and modules that I played with when I was a kid, that I would get a chance to actually convert them to the newest edition. But so I didn't know it was going to be a big moment in my life except for the fact that that was the day that my niece was born. So that's kind of interesting. And my favorite store, so in my town, I lived in central New Jersey, so fairly populous area, but we had a store called Tiny Tots, which was a toy store. It was basically kind of like a Toys R Us, but smaller. It was privately owned. I don't think it was a chain, but again, they carried all sorts of minis, dice, and they had, you're right, I think there was so few books out there at the time. I don't recall them carrying Judges Guild stuff. I didn't pick those things up until I got to Gen Con a few years later. But they had all the TSR books, and they had all of them displayed on like a rack. And I remember, just like you said too, whenever I had spare money, I had to buy the next module. I had to get the next module. I was like, might never play this module, but I had to buy it. So because something just makes you want to have everything somehow. So that's great. So did you play while you were in college, or was it at post college when you were playing D&D?
We started playing when I was in college. This would have
Okay.
been early 1976. I actually played my first game. A friend of a friend, um, one of her friends from back home was a game master, and he had he basically said he had sort of a reputation that Gary Gygax would cross the street if he saw him coming. So this is kind of that whole, that whole ego thing about the people in this industry goes way back. But he came to our college campus and ran. It was a Saturday night. And he ran a game adventure for us on campus that night, and that was my first game ever. And after that, just totally hooked.
Nice.
Of course, my character died.
Of course.
But
that's the true sign of an excellent game. We have this all the time when we get TPKs at conventions, and then the players are just like, I would play that again. And it was like, even though everybody died, I had a great time and everything. So were you primarily a game master or a player?
During that time frame, I think it was mostly game master. We all kind of carried those responsibilities. There were several of us who had the rules, and we kind of all carried that responsibility of making the dungeons. But I think I may have been the only one who, well, Merle Davenport, who was one of the other GMs who helped found what became the Fantastic Dungeoning Society, which became our group that published the Dungeoneer. He was the other regular game master at that time. And that continued that way for a few years until we got into some other games, and some other people were running those games. So after college, it changed more. We had more people running games, but during college, I think a lot of it was mostly me.
Okay, excellent. It's just fascinating. I mean, I remember the days when I first ran, we didn't know what we were doing half the time. We were misplaying a lot. There was a lot. I remember I probably played the game a year before I found out about saving throws, and I was like, whoa, there's like a chance you can roll a die and not die instantly. I'm like, how about that? I'm like, that's a good rule to probably remember. So.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the original D&D rules, the whole trying to figure out what does fights as 7 men mean in rule concepts, things like that, because the original rules were linked to Gary Gygax's chainmail game system, which was tabletop miniatures.
And if you didn't have a strong word game background, you obviously if you understood some of those terms, you knew what that meant. But if you didn't, and there were so many new people playing, and then that's how you got people they were all playing kind of differently and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't stop because the game and even Gygax used to say himself, it's like, because the rules are just the framework. It's all about the storytelling and getting together around the game table. And having a good time and making memories, and that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So one more question, Dark related. I'm going to throw off the side, unprepared and everything. Tell me about the Dark Tower video game. I heard that there was a potential, or there was a selling of licensing or something, but it never came to.
Okay.
So, yes,
okay. Yeah. Here's what happened. This would have been the late 80s.
Okay.
It was after my time at Coleco. I had I'd already been in the video game industry and then out of it again, and was back doing tabletop work again. And someone who had created, oh God, I can't remember the original video, the original game that he had created, but it was for the Macintosh only.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, they had published it, and they were looking where to go to get the content for the next game, because these guys were mostly um, on the programming side of things.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do, they went to Judges Guild and they licensed Dark Tower to be produced as their next video game. But they didn't have the ability to produce color graphics for the Macintosh, so it ultimately ended up going nowhere. And while they did involve me and contact me, I kind of turned over all my material that I had created, where I had taken Dark Tower and changed it to work with RuneQuest. But I didn't have I had a Macintosh, but I didn't have the ability to do color graphics. Okay. So, and then I think his life changed, and things went south for him with video games, and nothing ever happened with it.
Nothing ever, but there was almost a Dark Tower video.
There almost was.
Wow, that would have been amazing. So that's crazy. Well, thank you for all of your time, Jennell. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun getting to actually sit and talk to you. I feel like it would have been, almost like at the end of a convention, we're bumping into you at GaryCon or something like that, or North Texas Con, and just kind of picking your brain about what it was like, a decade before I ever even started gaming. So, but thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And obviously, I look up to you, and I think the world of you for everything that you've done in the gaming industry. Just absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, and thanks everybody for tuning in. So remember, Free RPG Day is tomorrow. So everybody go out to your local game store and please pick up some free swag and buy some things and celebrate role playing for a day. Everybody be safe out there, and everybody have a great afternoon and a wonderful weekend. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.